Coming back.
Slowly drifted into your arms. It blows away new directions. It's your turn to know something that is real. The Milky Way feels splendor. You're the weakness that I find. It melts away into forever. Lesson learned, and I know that it was real.
Check 1 2. Seem to be good to go. Let's get going on all this. Turn down the music in my own headphones. There we go. How's it going, everyone? Welcome back to another class, social journalism today. It's hard to keep track sometimes. I see we have a few viewers in chat, which is good. So, just to start, before we get started with really anything else, shout out in chat what's new in the news. While you do that and while I let the delay catch up, I'm going to get started talking about, well, at least what I've found. So, a lot has happened in the last week. Some of it good, most of it not so good. That's how things are going right now. The States is working on slowly reopening, to the detriment of a lot of people, in a lot of other people's opinion. We got in chat, Trudeau announced a $9 billion financial aid for post-secondary students, eligible for $1.25 a month from May through August. It's for students falling through the cracks of the existing programs. Yes, that's something that's being talked about a fair bit, is the idea of post-secondary students who rely on a summer job and probably won't have a summer job this year, and just students who, exactly that, they didn't have work going on in the first place, so they can't apply for the, I'll call it work welfare package, I forget the acronym. That's absolutely a thing, and I'm curious to see where it goes. A lot of what's going on right now, also shout out if the music is too loud, a lot of what's going on right now is very interesting because it plays into things, ideas like basic income. Is welfare a bad thing? Is government assistance a good or a bad thing? A lot of these programs are what some Americans might call a socialist program. For me, I call them common sense. That's where I stand politically, or economically. I'm biased in that I came from a place like that. I came from a place where financial assistance was a necessity for my family at times. We've got 100,000 people gathered for a funeral in Bangladesh. If you have the link to that article, or that piece of news, I'd love to have it up in chat. I'd love to be able to read it at some point. I don't think I've blocked links in chat at this point. I have a few I gathered for yourselves as well. A big one I talked about last week is hydroxychloroquine. The idea of the misinformation surrounding it as far as it being a cure for COVID. Well, interestingly enough, one study has since come out demonstrating that it is those in the study who were taking hydroxychloroquine actually had an increased death rate compared to those who didn't take it for COVID-19. There's still a lot of studies still out. A lot of things aren't quite certain with it, but one thing that is being talked about is the idea that this study at least shows that we shouldn't jump the gun and assume it's a cure-all. Thank you for posting that link in the chat. I'll be checking it out later. And anyone in chat, feel free to look at that link as well. I have a few on Canvas for you guys. I'm going to switch over there for a moment. There we go. So I have a few here for you in Canvas in your weekly folder. One on hydroxychloroquine, which I have up here. It's from AP. And for those who have in the past asked me what news sources are trustworthy, AP is one of the best. It's American Press, or Associated Press. They are one of the news sites or news sources that other news sources get their information from. Very often you'll see articles on things like CNN, on CBC, saying where it would have normally an author's line, it just says Associated Press or Canadian Press. Both of those sources are very trustworthy, in my opinion, as a journalist. So again, in this case, it's the death rate for those on hydroxychloroquine was higher than those who weren't. That's not definitive. It's not a double-blind study, but it's worth looking into. Other news I grabbed you, and if you have other news, feel free to shout out in chat. I'll get to it as it comes up. Oil prices this week went into the negatives, which is huge news. Basically, oil, at the time it hit negative, oil was worth so little that they had to pay people to take it away. How did it get to this point? There's a lot of different factors involved. Some big ones, there was a big, initially there was a big Russian and Saudi Arabian price war over oil going on, which drove down prices. And then different blocked oil pipelines and plans like that also created issue. And finally, no one's using oil right now. We're all, for the most part, everyone's at home. No one's flying, and very few people are driving, albeit that's petrol. And so they're running out of space to store everything and need to get rid of it. So much so that they will pay you to take it. I think at one point, I believe, yes, U.S. or American oil dropped as low as negative $37 a barrel. So for every barrel of oil you took away from them, you'd get $37 American. Really good way to raise some money. Canadian oil is not much better. There's all sorts of speculation. Things are still kind of up in the air on it. But the general rule is Canadian oil, especially oil sands, crude oil, is generally valued at less than American. So if American crude oil is at negative 37, it's assumed Canadian is going to be much worse. This already hits a very heavily hit Alberta, which is going through a whole bunch of different issues with COVID and with the economy. So I'm very curious to see where this goes. It's worth following this story, in my opinion. This will be an ongoing thing. We have some fires in downtown Hamilton. 3 different places on James North were, subject to arson. This past, let's see, that's April 22nd. So, Tuesday evening, presumably. La Bichette and Grey Harbor Tattoo Parlor, both together, sustained a significant amount of damage. And Born and Raised, which is right next to, let's see, used to be Contemporary Gallery. I don't know what it is now. It's also right next to the Hammer City record store, which is a alternative punk record store. So Born and Raised, I guess their fire wasn't too significant, but either way, still worthy of a charge. The man involved, a 32-year-old with no fixed address, has been charged with 6 arson-related charges and 3 breaches to probation. We'll see what kind of damage this does to these different stores. It's presumed that La Bichette and Gray Harbor will have a significant, it'll have a significant economic impact on them, which isn't great. So we'll see if any charities, if any fundraising goes on to help them out. Especially, for me, Gray Harbor especially, because I know a few people who have chairs there and do tattooing there. In fact, one of my tattoo artists has a chair there. Finally, I'd be amiss if I didn't bring up this piece of news, because as a journalism, I believe in clarity, and this directly relates to all of us. A Mohawk College instructor has, based on some photos that were put out, told students to ignore physical distancing. Quote, "I do not stand 6 feet away from people. I will not be mind controlled," according to instructor John Weber. I bring this up because I don't want to pretend like I'm burying this story, like this isn't important. I also want to go on record and say that this man is wrong. Everything he said to his students is wrong. He's allowed to feel how he feels, but to encourage any student, anyone, to just ignore all these health guidelines that are in place for very clear reasons is wrong, at least in my opinion. Currently, there is an internal investigation going on. He teaches Java programming. There's a few more quotes from him. He apparently assigned his students to read the dystopian novels 1984 and Brave New World. Yeah, there's a whole statement. I don't want to give this guy's voice a platform, but I do want to say that when you're out, when you have to go out, stay 6 feet away from people. When you don't have to go out, don't. How do I put it? There's a lot of people's lives at risk if we don't follow these rules. And these rules aren't here to make us slaves. They're not here to make us sheeple or any of that other garbage. They're there so that innocent people just trying to live their lives don't die. So again, I wanted to bring that one up. All of these are on Canvas if you want to give them a further read, and I recommend digging deeper. There's always more story than just the article. We can only fit so much into a page of writing. So, before we move on, does anyone else have any news? Or does anyone want to talk about what I've brought up here? I'll give you a second. And I agree that that's not right, what that instructor did. It's always upsetting. There's a lot of good news that comes out of Mohawk, but occasionally there's a story like that, and they come out of all educational institutions. It happens, and it's tough to. It's frustrating to be associated with someone like that. I have no problem with free speech, or I have no problem with voicing one's opinion. I have a problem with encouraging people who are, I hesitate to use the phrase under you, but people who are looking to you for instruction. It's a jerk move to use that platform to encourage something like that. I know my cousin has the virus, which is stressing. It's worse. They live in New York. Yes, New York is, why don't we... Just going to bring up the statistics. I'm not going to dissect them. I don't want to stress everyone out, but it's worth seeing the information. Can't even imagine his students and how they must feel. Well, my best guess is that it's one of his students that reported this. After all, it's not. I hope it's not. It's not like there's hidden spies online for Mohawk seeing what every instructor posts. It was probably a student who said, "Hey, my instructor gave us a really weird assignment and was saying some troubling stuff. You might want to be aware of it." Not sure whether they went right to the news, whether they went right to Mohawk first, who knows. But yeah, I couldn't imagine being their student and thinking either, well, I've either got to do the assignment because I'll lose marks, or I need to like fight this. Bluebird, hello. Thank you for joining class. So for those who don't know, today we're learning about marketing our brands or marketing our work online. But first, I thought I'd, we go through the news. After all, it's a journalism class. So real quick, I'm not going to pull up the display quite yet, but coronavirus cases are sitting at over 2,600,000 right now. Deaths are at 181,000. The good news is 712,000 people have recovered. And if we look to Canada, because really I care primarily about Canada, of the 2.6 million people who have coronavirus, we have 39,000. Heard a little bit ago my mailman had the virus. Interesting. It is very curious how different organizations have to deal with something like that. A big thing in the States right now is different meat packing facilities or meat processing facilities have had outbreaks, and that really disrupts a big supply chain. They provide meat to entire states or entire counties. To see how they deal with it is very interesting. There's a confirmed case of coronavirus in the Shoppers Drug Mart on Upper James near Mohawk College. And they shut down the entire store, had to clean it. Same thing that happened to the McDonald's way back that turned out to be a false flag. In this case, at least so far, it seems to be true. And that's difficult. It's a big impact to suddenly say, in an instant, we have to shut everything down, clean everything, and everyone has to be concerned that they might be sick. Just in an instant. I didn't snap because my mic doesn't like snapping. The media's kind of dumb. Media only talks about deaths and cases, not the recovery. Well, at the end of the day, it's worth, how do I put it? There are different news values that journalists have to consider when they're putting out news. And I might drop that in a lesson at some point in the next week or two. At the end of the day, people read about the deaths, the cases. They don't necessarily read about the recoveries. And so journalists don't necessarily put out that information. It's not a story that people care about as much. Because if I walk up to someone and someone standing next to me said, "Careful, they have coronavirus. You need to stand further back. You need to wear a mask." That's way more concerning to me than, "Hey, yeah, that guy completely recovered from coronavirus two months ago. Perfectly fine standing next to him." Like, that's cool, but it means less to me. There's less I have to do or be concerned about. Yes, I can turn down the music a bit. How's that? So let's start talking about class. Let's start talking about our actual lesson today, right? Switch to display. If the music is still too loud, I can turn it down more. I can also turn up my mic a tad. So today we are talking about how we market our brands. There we go. and we're going to talk about what our brand means. So the first thing, well, ultimately our agenda today is we're going to talk about what your brand is, what your product is, and tools to get the word out about both of those things. Then we'll have a little wind down, our normal quick chat at the end. So, I want to start with this. Why are we talking about brands and products? This is a journalism class, right? Well, ultimately, while this is a journalism class, it's one of many journalism classes that you would take in college, right? And you'd be taking multiple at once. In a lot of them, you'd already start learning how to write articles, how to find articles, how to search for news. I can't teach you all of that in this one class, especially now that it's online. But even still, we have 3 hours a week normally, and only so many weeks to teach. So it's very likely you guys don't have any news articles written. You don't have any videos created. So what I want to capitalize on is the fact that a lot of you have, all of you have ideas. All of you have skills. I hope all of you have hobbies, and I hope all of you have goals. You're working towards something. There's a reason you're taking this class. There's a reason you're following through with school. I'm hoping it leads to something. And I don't care if that's journalism. I don't care if that's you want to be a doctor one day. And I don't care if you want to be a musician. That's all great. But no one thing is more important than any of the others. What's awesome is that no matter what you want to do, we can work with it. We can really take time to think about what you can do, what you can learn, and think about what kind of needs you can fill. And that's what we talk about when we talk about products. Every product fills a need. You can think about who you make connections with online, who you choose for your friends, who you really like to talk about, or what different brands you indulge in. And we can build on all of that. Ultimately, your product, again, can be art, it can be music, it could be an invention, it could be a service. If you want to be a mechanic, awesome. We need mechanics. And I hope all of you do decide that your product should be journalism, that it should be spreading the news, that it should be informing people and making sure people have all the story, instead of just their own perspective. But until you make that decision, until you enter the journalism program and are kind of saturated in all of that, we'll simply work with the idea of what you may want to do and what you may want to produce for a product. That's why I'm using the terms brands and products instead of news articles and journalistic brand. That was a lot of talking in 1 second. Give me a sec to have a sip of water. There we go. That was a nice little rant there. So, the question is, who are you professionally? Or who do you want to be? I imagine most of you don't have a successful business making you hundreds of thousands of dollars a year. If you do, that's awesome. But let's talk about what you want to do. That age-old question of who do you want to be when you grow up? You are approaching that phase where you start not necessarily making the ultimate decision, but start trying to narrow it down. I had friends in journalism who came back to the program at age, in their 40s. My best friend, Matt, he came back in his late 30s, early 40s to be a journalist. And now he's writing. Now he's living his dream. He had to make multiple decisions before that. So what do you want to be? I know that some of you, based on your Instagram assignments, some of you cook, some of you make art. At least one of you works in music, which is awesome. Let that be your brand. Let that guide you. So let's talk about brainstorming a brand. So when we talk about brainstorming a brand, there's a few different steps we follow in doing this. And the first step is think to yourself what you might want for a job title. You can be broad. you can be super broad with this. This will start to focus your point of view, focus on what you are interested in, what you need to start looking toward. The more focused your perspective is, the easier it is to plan how you're going to move forward. So in my case, I'm going to use for our sample person, we're going to say they want to be a journalist. That's their job title. If you want to be a musician, if you want to be an artist, if you want to be a lawyer, that's cool. But I would argue the first step is to think of that job title you might want to have. And some of you might want to have multiple. And if you have multiple, if you want to be a journalist photographer, there are two different paths you kind of have to learn to walk at the same time. It's not impossible. It happens all the time. So, moving on. There we go. So, if you haven't noticed, our background has focused in a little bit because I'm clever like that. Our second step is finding that focus. Yes, I want to be a journalist. What do I want to do as a journalist? Of all the things you could do under the job title you choose, what do you want to do? Pardon me, I'm going to turn down the music in my own headphones a tad. There we go. So if, there's, every job has multiple different facets. You could say a director of movies, but there's all sorts of different kinds of movies. There's all sorts of different kinds of directing that can be done. So for like an editor, how do we show that in a professional way? I will get to that in a moment. Let's get through these steps for brainstorming a brand. But let's look at editor as one of the examples we can use. So in the case of our finding a focus, what kind of editing do you want to do? What kind of, in our case, I chose writing as my example. What kind of writing do I want to do? Within editing, for example, there's all sorts of different kinds of product you can edit. If you want to be a journalistic editor, like an editor-in-chief, that's its own path as opposed to a copy editor or a publication editor for novels. So you consider your skills. You consider what you want to know. You consider what you have to offer. If I'm a good writer, then writing might be my opportunity. If I want to do something, if I have that dream that I want to pursue, but I'm not quite there yet, especially with a lot of you being just about to enter college, this is your opportunity to say, I want to be a writer. I'm going to take classes to write. I want to be a photographer, but I've never picked up a camera in my life. This is the time to think, maybe I should pick up the camera. You can, again, choose multiple paths. If I'm going with journalist and then focusing on writing, I could also focus on photography. But keep it reasonable. I can't do everything at once. That's what the second half of my life is for. I'm in my 20s. If I want to learn a new skill, but still master the one I'm doing, I'm going to focus on what's going to make me money, what's working right now, and slowly build on that. So with, again, journalism, we could focus on photography, writing, video reporting, etc., etc. You could be a host, you could be an anchor on a news show. But you need to make those choices actively. Moving on, you find your niche. So I'm going to stick with journalism and we'll talk about editing in a moment, just because it was brought up. Within your skill set, figure out your own style. This begins with your own identity, who you are. Because not anyone, but there's going to be a million different writers out there, or journalistic writers. But there's one you, and you need to figure out what makes you different. A painter can focus on specific subjects. They could do still lifes, they could do landscapes. They could do different styles, they could do pointillism, they could do abstract. They could be a data artist, which is my favorite type of art. In this case, our writer wants to focus on hard news, crime news, political, because they're very motivated that way. They want to show the rights and wrongs of what's going on right now. In my case, I'm more arts and culture. I like talking about food. I like talking about art. To me, it's it's fun, it's enjoyable, that's who I am. So our journalistic editor is going to start working with writers. They're going to start working on their own with their own writing, because at the end of the day, you can't be an editor if you can't write to some degree. If our editor wants to focus on books, you figure out what kind of book you like to work with. If romance is your thing, make romance your niche. If fantasy writing and big epic novels are your thing, start working on those. Either start writing or find people who also are interested in writing that kind of thing and help with their work, edit their work. I have one friend who really loves manga, and he started writing a manga. And I was involved very early on with editing his work because he knew I was good at writing. It didn't really go very far for me. I had to move cities. But he's still working away at it, to my knowledge. Finally, there's two steps that kind of happen at the same time. You need to find your audience, and you need to start making. Because I can say I'm a journalist till I'm blue in the face, but if I don't have articles and I don't have people to read them, then I'm nothing. Like, it's a sad reality that unless your product is being consumed, you don't have a product for all intents and purposes. And I hate to sound so harsh with that. Let's go through how we can kind of build on it. So on one side, we're finding an audience. We're going online. We're finding groups who might enjoy our work. So in the case of our journalist who likes hard news, political news, there's different groups online for, let's say, Hamilton, which is a city hall that's in the background, who keep an eye on the politicians, who comment on political decisions within the city. Posting into those groups on Facebook, your newest article that you wrote on your own blog, is a really good way to build an audience. Doing videos is a good way to start building. And the more accurate you make it, the more you can fit into this role of a journalist instead of a blogger. Build an online presence with a blog, with social media, with a website, which is what we're talking about today. Having your own website or blog is an awesome way to start making a footprint on the internet for yourself. Finally, get your ideas or work to someone who can share it around, ideally for pay. Start pitching stories to journalistic publications. If you're a musician, start showing off samples of your music to different venues to see if you can get a gig. Show it to different producers to see if they'll sign you to a label. Or if you want to do independent, it's all about getting your stuff produced and sending it out to your audience directly. Which brings us over to creating. There's no point in any of this if you don't actually do the work. If I say I'm a carpenter, I need to deliver my woodworking to someone. At least to say I'm professional at it. Ideally, you want to find a way to sell your work. This can be very, very tough. It can be very, very easy. It depends on who you know, what connections you make, how interesting your product is. Ultimately, there might be a period early on where you're doing stuff for cheap or for free. If you can do all that within the scope of an internship, that's even better. In journalism, that's fairly easy to do. And in fact, those of you who do come to Mohawk and study journalism at my college, you have to do an internship in your program anyways. I did mine at CBC. You can do yours pretty much anywhere that's relevant. Ultimately, creating your product is where the rubber hits the road. The journalist needs their articles or videos. The musician needs their music. The carpenter needs their woodworking. In the case of our writer goes to city council meetings, which you can do. As a resident of Hamilton, you can sit in on city council meetings, and comes up with stories right there. Starts writing down notes, taking audio of what's going on so you can get quotes. That's a really good way to start in municipal politics as a journalist, is to just be part of municipal politics. So, what are our takeaways here? I've seen a lot of people follow this path. I have a few friends who are right in the middle of that building audience, building product kind of thing. I've seen people who've moved beyond that and really have their own brands or companies. I've seen people who are still kind of trying to find their footing with what their brand is and what they're doing. And I'm just talking about people who are in my year of journalism school. Never mind all the other professionals out there. I've also seen many people take other paths, and I was one who did this. I took journalism, pardon me. I studied journalism because I was good at writing. That's one of my professors in an earlier program saw my writing, was like, you should take my journalism program. And I said, sure, but I'm not taking yours. I'm going to Mohawk instead. And I thought I'd write. I thought I'd dig up news and write, and that'd be pretty much my career. Second year of journalism school, I fell in love with video. I fell in love with editing. I fell in love with all this technical stuff I have in front of me that lets me stream my class to you. And all of that boiled down to people taking notice in my program and me doing well in my program and having this ambition. Ultimately, it boiled down to I had some people reach out to me like, hey, could you make me videos? So I do, and I get paid for it. And I had other people reach out to me saying, hey, could you teach a class? And I said, what? Sure. I wanted to teach before I wanted to do journalism. Somehow I roundabout got into the position I'm in. A lot of it's serendipity. A lot of it's the people you know. A lot of it is just being a hard worker, and people notice that. And take credit for your work, which is something I myself used to be particularly bad for. I didn't want to be in the limelight. I didn't want to be in front of the camera. I didn't want to show myself off. I wanted to show my work and let it speak for me. But they're interconnected. They're one and the same. For the record, I was crossing my fingers there. The awesome part about all of this is that even if you follow a different step or a different path toward whatever your career is, every one of these steps is still a good thing. Knowing what you want to show to the world is an awesome thing. Creating a product is an awesome thing. Branding yourself and getting yourself out there, having a website for yourself, regardless of if it's not quite relevant anymore, is still great. It's a good way to be discovered. One thing I learned in journalism, and for those who do take this program in the future, I hope you'll learn too, is that having a conversation with someone is exhilarating. At least with a stranger, someone you haven't met, someone you can learn about. It is awesome. And to be part of that conversation in person when you have the chance, at the job when you have the chance, online when you have the chance, is exhilarating. It's awesome to be part of that bigger circle that you built. It's also awesome to have a smaller circle that you keep to yourself, your own personal life, where you can de-stress. Like, I'm still an introvert, but I love talking with people. Every one of the steps on this path is a good call, regardless of where you wind up. And what's the harm of putting your work out there? You put an awesome article out there, it may not have anything to do with what you're trying to do now, but putting it out there lets it get noticed. That said, at the end of the day, like I've been saying, the most important part of all of this is you need a product. You need something to give people to fill a need. In the case of journalism, it's people need information. In the case of woodworking, it's people need cutting boards. Who am I to say? Which brings us to this. Your product. Our Reddit's product is news, stories, the collection of facts. Because a lot of people don't want to go out there and dig up every fact about a subject. Those of you who I've said, take the stories I've shown you and dig deeper. If you do, awesome. If you don't, I won't be surprised. That's kind of the norm. People want easy information, and journalism does that. Your product may tie to journalism. It might be news coverage. It might be something more artistic. It might be personality driven. You might want to be an influencer. You might want to be a comedian. There's a better example of personality-driven content. Who am I to say and who am I to judge? The important part is you make sure you know what value your work has. Figure out what you're worth, what your work is worth. Whether it's your time, whether it's materials. We'll talk about that in a little bit. Also, you should talk about you should think about how you can assist the people who might want to pay you. Because that's the important part. Like myself as a videographer. Yes, I can say, here's a video, pay for it. Or I can say, you look like you need a video. Let's talk about how we can make one that's awesome, that you'll be happy to pay for. And that's building a brand. That's building customer relations. That's building good PR. It's a good thing. So, what I don't care about, there's kind of a list of both, right? I don't care about what your product is. I don't care about who your audience is, who you'd be selling to. I don't really care how much money your product is worth, or whether the product's an item or a service. And I don't care how good you are at producing your product. It could take you twice as long as a professional who's been 10 years in the making. I don't care. What I care about is that you can identify an audience, that you can see who might want your product. What I care about is that you feel your product is of value. Whether you're making music, whether you're making art, whether you're making people laugh as a comedian, I want you to know that that is worth something. You shouldn't just be given exposure or nothing for your product. I want you to know that you need to be flexible with all of this and how to do that. That all these things fluctuate constantly. I want you to know that you should keep working on your product. Your product could make you money. My videos make me money, but they can be better. I can learn new skills. I can add more to my videos. I can keep building on my brand and my product. Hopefully it makes it more valuable, but at least I hope it makes it more fulfilling. I hope it makes it more interesting. Finally, I care that you know how to promote your product, which again is our final point in today's class. So let's talk about a few of these. Identifying your audience. You want to think about who might like your product. And again, just take a second, while I take a sip of water, to think what your product might be, what your brand might be. Just come up with an imaginary one. Doesn't have to be too serious right now. So, you want to think who might enjoy it. If it's journalism and you're writing about art like myself, it's going to be artists, it's going to be art communities, it's going to be the people who go to Art Crawl, who want my articles, who want my information. You should research relevant groups. Facebook and Reddit are amazing for this. There are subreddits for everything. There's Facebook groups for everything. And most of these enthusiast Facebook groups and Reddit groups are pretty tame, pretty chill. You want to talk to people about your work, just in conversation. Just when someone asks how you've been doing. Yeah, I've been working on this, like this is my current pet project. What do you think of it? See who is interested. See what kind of people are like, yeah, I totally dig that. And see what people just kind of don't care or just nice about it. How do you value your product? I'm going over instead of down. First of all, the best way to value your product is to value it, to care about it. You can't just take a devil-may-care approach to the work you put into something. It's worth something. You put your time into it. You put energy into it. You put possibly materials into it. Every time I make a video, at the very least, I've put the cost of the program that I use to make my videos into my video. Never mind all the work. Look how much time goes into your product, and other expenses. If you're a woodworker, there's all these materials that go into your work as well. If you're selling an item, if you're selling a service, There's a lot of time, there's a lot of effort that goes into what you do. Look at your audience and try to determine their budget. That's another good way to value your product, because at the end of the day, if you're an esthetician, let's say, you do nails and like manicures, pedicures, waxing, all that. Yes, there are materials. And maybe you got an amazing deal on materials and it doesn't cost you that much to do a manicure. But if your audience is willing to pay $5 for it because all the other salons charge $6, don't try to sell your product for $2. A, because you're losing money. B, because you look cheap. You need to do research on your audience and others who are out there like yourself. I price my videos based on, yes, these first two factors, how much I care, how much time goes in, how many expenses, but I also have to price based on what the guy above me and the guy below me for pricing are charging and what they're offering. Why should you be flexible? Ultimately, plans don't work out. Businesses fail all the time. Sadly enough, consider how many businesses will probably vanish once all this COVID-19 stuff is all done. I guarantee you a good chunk of restaurants, probably at least 50% of restaurants will be gone, and replaced by new stuff. Sometimes your product value or audience are wrong. Your pricing is off. Your audience turns out not to like it as much as you think they would, or they don't have the budget you thought they did. You have to be flexible in that. You have to figure out ways to deal with that. And again, sometimes life gets in the way. COVID-19 is a very good example. Put yourself in the shoes of the person who opened their business the day before lockdown went in effect. Like, how much must that have sucked? Putting all your money into a storefront, your product, your staff, and then suddenly everyone has to stay home. You're not an essential service. Things happen. Why keep working on your product? I've kind of talked about this a bit already, but everything can be made better. You aren't a master yet. I guarantee you, you're not a master yet. You're going to keep learning over time. And sometimes the first design of your product's not the best. You can add something to it to make it better. That's just how things go. So, if we're talking about promoting your product, which was our last category, I want to make sure you guys know how to do this. There are lots of ways to promote our brand, our product. And online promotion is my biggest recommendation. Like, you could get TV ads and flyers and all that, fair. Online promotion's easy to set up for the most part. It's super cheap for the most part. It's very flexible. And it directly connects you to your audience. You're both looking at the same web page when you put it out and when they consume it. The following are some tools I put together as examples of how to promote your work online. There are multiple tools out there. These are just the basic ones, and for the most part free. So the first I wanted to show you is Twitter. We've talked about most of the basic social media already, but let's go through it one more time. Twitter has a whole bunch of different communities. Journalism is a big one, but artists are also really big on Twitter. It's pretty much the two communities that I follow, but there's a whole bunch of different ones. It's a really good platform to quickly share your content and to share quick content. So writing, art, video links, stuff that's one picture, a link, nothing too involved. It's not a good place to go on and on about your work. It's pretty much one tweet is one piece. That's about it. It's a really good way to share your work and build your personal brand at the same time, because people will see how you speak about your piece, what kind of description you give the link you're putting out. You can share stuff other than just your work. Just try to keep it professional if you're doing a professional brand. If you're an artist and you're showing off your art, you can be a bit more casual than a journalist talking about city politics. So I recommend Twitter for writers, artists, videographers, really anything digital that you can quickly just put out there. I have some examples here. Let's see how easily they come up. There we go. Ah, pretty easily. So this is an artist that I follow. She's not local, but she's been to a few conventions locally. Star Pirate. And most of her Twitter is just showing off her art. Showing off whether it's other people's art, commissions she's done. But it's nice, light, fun. Here's her building more to her brand than just her own work. She's showing off her character in Animal Crossing. Or her cat. But for the most part, everything is on brand. Everything's colorful, everything's flashy, everything's artistic. So, we'll take this example and swap over to something more like... Pardon me. There we go. Swap over to something more like Molly Hayes. Molly Hayes is a journalist with the Globe and Mail and was formerly with the Hamilton Spectator. I found her through a couple other journalists that I follow. For the most part, what she shares is her own articles. So this article about the death toll in Nova Scotia due to the mass shooting that happened there not too long ago. She puts a little caption in. She tags relevant people. In fact, this is someone else tweeting her article and tagging her in it, which she retweeted. Better example, her talking about her own piece. Just a little lead into it about, in this case, a murder-suicide. She obviously covers harder news. Victims in Nova Scotia. Here's another piece that I assume she just felt was interesting. She shared a quote from it. The point is that this brand is very on brand. It's simple, straightforward journalism. It's her sharing information at every turn. Or retweeting things that are relevant and fit in with her brand and her interests. And the more you know your brand, the more natural this is going to feel of adding stuff to your work. There we go. Finally, I want to look at Flern, which I highly recommend if you're interested in photo editing. Flern is a really, really good brand. It's kind of an education portal or education platform. They put out all sorts of videos. Some are free on YouTube, some are paid on their website. I use their free videos on YouTube all the time. So they share their different resources, their different videos that they put out. In the case with COVID-19, they have a pinned tweet where they have a whole list of COVID-19 resources for photographers, creatives, artists, and they have that pinned so it's constantly up top and they're regularly updating it. But the thing you'll notice about this brand is everything is their own. There's not much retweeting. Everything is their own stuff, and it's very well planned out. It's very well executed because they're a company that relies on their branding. Everything has to fit within the mold that they create. So there's a big difference. You have a lot of creative freedom with Star Pirate as far as what you can show. With the journalist Molly Hayes, we have everything fits within a niche, but it's not necessarily all her stuff. She's building upon her own brand with other people who are relevant. And then Flern has more than enough stuff it puts out because there are multiple people working for the company, and all of it fits within a narrow column. Simply put, 3 different ways to approach the same platform, right? So let's look at the next one, Instagram. This is based on timing. This is probably the last one I'll give all the examples for. But we've already had a taste of Instagram, and I do want to comment, those who did their Instagram assignments, overall, really well done. Obviously, things things happened that changed how our original plans would go. But again, a few of you took up some cooking over while everything's being locked down. Some of you have done art and various other things to keep yourself busy. Again, at least one of you has been making music, and that was a very interesting one to read. A lot of you have a really good sense of how to market yourself on Instagram, which is to talk directly to your audience and say, like, hey guys, here's what I'm doing. Here's why it's awesome. Come check it out. And that's a good skill to have, to be able to be part of that conversation, that exhilaration of, this is the circle around me that I created. Instagram's a good place to build a following, and you talk directly to that following. It's an awesome way to promote a very visual product. So if you're an artist, if you're a cook, if you're a photographer, this is a really good way to build on that. It's very interactive. You can build all these intricate stories. You can talk directly to people. You can go live on Instagram. But it also keeps your audience at I'll say a weird arm's length. It keeps you kind of a step above everyone, like on this pedestal where you're talking to people. Which is good, it's bad. It depends. It's its own vibe, for sure. I enjoy it because it's a really good way to not get caught up in maybe doing something unprofessional, being too silly, being reckless with your brand, because you feel like you're being watched. Again, good thing, bad thing, it depends on how you're approaching this. Instagram allows you to show off your personality, but it does better if you stick to your own brand. It's hard to do what Star Pirate did on Twitter, because if everyone's coming to my Instagram for my photography, my Instagram story about how I'm cooking dinner really sticks out like a sore thumb. That said, I still post Instagram stories about what I'm cooking for dinner. Ultimately, on Instagram, for better or for worse, everything needs to be short and sweet. Your photos, your captions, unless you're going really complex with it, everything needs to be simple, because simple is better. Simple gets more views, simple gets more clicks, simple gets more interaction. You can build on that by talking to people on Instagram, through chat, through DMs, through whatever. Instagram's a really good good platform for solo brands. So like a comedian, be great on Instagram. A photographer is great on Instagram. Models do really well on Instagram. Anything tangible too, like the carpenter does really well on Instagram because they can show off their work with a really nice photo. That said, if you're going to be a truly professional brand, as far as products go, you want to be able to take really good photos. So I have a few examples that I want to pull up. The first is Suki. Suki is a model. Suki is also a cat. Suki goes on adventures with her owners. I believe her. Regardless. Ultimately, this is a photography account, but all the photos focus on our one subject, which is Suki the cat. And some of these photos are really, really, really gorgeous. But you'll notice that everything, except the one photo of a dog, oh, there's Suki. Everything fits this brand precisely. There's no weird post about, hey, here's what we made for dinner. It's all about the cat, which is great. I bet you whoever made this account has 3 other accounts. I bet there's one for the dog. I bet there's one for just general photography. And I bet there's one for personal. I can't say for sure. I'm going to just leave it on the cat nose for a second. Ultimately, Instagram boils down to the more on brand you are, the better your things do. Because it's simple and easy for viewers to go to. They know that every time they go to your account to see a new thing, they'll see something they expect. In this case, Suki the cat. So next up, we have Lisa V photography. She's a general photographer. She shoots a bit of everything, and I believe she's local. Yes, I follow her. Her work is solid work. But you'll notice there's no one subject in anything she shoots. There's a bit of outdoors. There's some subject shooting or model shooting. Got a very nice photo of a woodpecker. It's all over, but all these photos are nice photos. Everything's on brand because her style and the simple fact that this is just all nice photography fits in to her one brand as a photographer. Finally, we have we have the Burnt Tongue, which, for those of you who aren't familiar, Burnt Tongue is a restaurant or a couple of restaurants here in Hamilton that all focuses on soup, and I love their soups. They're very, very, very tasty. And even now, they're still offering delivery for their soups, which is what you're seeing here. These individual posts about what soup they are delivering for the day. And you'll note that this is a product. This is product photography at its finest. It's a simple photo of the soup, simple little graphic they create, and then all the information is there. Taking orders till 2 p.m. Click the link in the bio to order. Thanks for the support. This is a really good way to deal with COVID that they've been making use of. I want to take you a bit further back to what they were posting a bit earlier on. So every day they would post 3 posts, one for each store, and they would show their order board, what the menu was for the day, because their soups change every day. And you've got the board, you have an idea of the prices, and then you're looking at, again, nice photos of the soup that are available that day. And there were times earlier on when we could go out and about, I would wait to see what they were posting for the day so that I could decide if I wanted to go down to the Burnt Tongue that day and order some soup. Their brand is super, super, super specific because that's pretty much all their posts is the order boards. The occasional update at times, but you can see it's pretty much all the same. This is a really, really, really good example of what a brand can do, a business can do to set a consistent brand for themselves, a consistent idea for themselves on any one social media platform. What they also have, which is worth looking at, is their pricing matrix, because you'll notice that on their boards you've got C, CV, C, VV, C, B, B, A. Each of those refers to a different price, and they have that available to anyone just in their Instagram story as a memory. So let's get off Instagram and move on to newer and better stuff. There it is. So we've got blogs. Blogs are one of, in my opinion, they're one of the oldest ways to get your brand out there on the internet. Blogs have been around pretty much since the World Wide Web has existed. Since you could build your own www, have your own domain, blogs have existed. Some of them seeking to make money, others just seeking to spread a message. Blogs are awesome because they're completely under your control. I control every aspect of the website I build. When I say blogs, I say website. It's same message, same idea in this case. That said, they're a fair bit of work to maintain. You need to be constantly posting on them. You need to make sure they look good. Graphics change over time, and if your blog's 5 years old, it will look 5 years old on the internet. I'll pull up 2 examples in this case, just to give you an idea of that. If you can't make the graphics look good, there's plenty of programs out there that help you with that. Like Wix is a really good blog platform, and they have all sorts of templates. Those templates look fine. Go with that if you're not a great graphic designer. The cool thing about blogs is it lets you market your product in all sorts of ways. If you have photography, you can build a gallery. If you have woodworking, you can build a sales page. It's really good for blogs are also really good for overarching content. So if I continue with these classes, if I continue teaching on live stream, I might build a blog to highlight each lesson and some information from it. It's an ongoing brand. Blogs also keep your audience coming back for more, assuming you're doing them well. If you build trust in your audience with a blog, if they find the information entertaining or interesting or useful, they'll keep coming back to see what other information you have for them. The downside of blogs is that at times old content doesn't always age well. Especially if you're going for something that's not like basic cooking or a mommy blog or anything like that. If you're going in for music, if you're going in for politics, things can feel dated after a while. So blogs are really good platforms. Websites are really good platforms for writers of all kinds. If you want to do an ongoing fantasy novel blog where each week you add a new chapter, do it. It's great for teaching. And I don't just mean my position of teaching for college, but mommy blogs are all about teaching. The good ones, we'll say. The good mommy blogs are all about teaching about a new thing to help parents. A new way to feed your kid potatoes that they might like. It's all about teaching the audience, which is a very interesting dynamic. Blogs are also for specific messages or, again, anything ongoing or overarching. So I want to give you an idea. I have a couple examples of blogs here. There's all sorts of examples online. I want to give you an idea of different designs and how graphic design is important for blogs. So let's look at Pinch of Yum real quick. So Pinch of Yum is a very, very well-known food blog. They go through all sorts of different recipes, a little bit of information. Lindsay, who runs the blog, former 4th grade teacher, now full-time blogger. So they put out new recipes on a regular basis, every couple of days. Super straightforward, super simple to look at. Very, very pretty. Let's look at a different example real quick. Let's look at Pressure Luck. Pressure Luck Cooking. Looks just as pretty as Pinch of Yum, no? No, I'll admit the site does not look pretty. It looks kind of dated. Everything's square and red and very bright. But that doesn't necessarily mean everything. In fact, this blog here is of all people my mom's favorite food blog, because this man, all his cooking is done with an Instant Pot, which is like a pressure cooking pot. Hope maybe your parents have it, maybe you have one. They're very, very useful. And he's one of the, in my mom's opinion at least, one of the best pressure cooker Instant Pot cooks out there. And so while his blog doesn't look the most beautiful, his food does not have the nicest photos, the design is not the best, the recipes are solid. And he's built a following so big that he actually has put out a cookbook at this point. But he's built a following through the quality of his recipes, not through the beauty of his blog. Whereas this one, it's some good SEO, some nice photos, some good descriptions, and hopefully tasty recipes. But I'll admit, I don't know Pinch of Yum. It just looks like a nice blog, right? So moving on from blogs, we've got LinkedIn, which we'll be talking about more next week. But LinkedIn, like I've said before, is like Facebook for professionals. It allows you to show off your work to people who might hire you. And it's a really good way to build a portfolio. That said, you have to act quote-unquote professional. It's not a place to be like the edgy employee. No one's looking for that. We'll talk about it more next week when I assign you the final assignment, which is a LinkedIn profile assignment. But for now, just know it's a really good platform for professionals, quote unquote. It's a good platform for writers. It's great for journalists because you can, just like Twitter, post your articles. It's great for building a portfolio. In fact, I'm thinking I'll pull up an example of my account rather than any of these three to show you what a portfolio looks like. It's good for getting found. People are on LinkedIn looking to hire. There are devices on LinkedIn where you can apply to jobs. It's a very useful platform. We got a question coming up. I will answer right when we're done the lesson here. How would we show our brand and our blog and make it catchy on something like Twitch or a website? Make this an answer for later. Yeah, I'll talk about that right after this because there are a few ways we can do that. But let me pull up LinkedIn. I'll pull up one account here and instead I apparently have to verify. There we go. So I'm just pulling up my own account rather than anyone else's, just because, to be honest, my account needs updating, but I feel like it's maintaining itself fairly well. So if I look at my profile, we've got a little about blurb, just about who I am, storyteller by trade, pride myself, abilities to tell stories. I do photography, multimedia. I haven't updated it to say that I'm a professor. But then I also have things like I have a link to my portfolio website. I have an example of, well, a couple examples of my video work. A documentary I made about craft beer. A video about street art in Hamilton. I have my different jobs I've worked over the last while, and for some of them I have exact examples of what I did at those jobs. So in the case of when I was working for Mohawk as a content creator, I made a video about how to apply for same-day admission. When I worked as a newsroom assistant, I edited the school news show every couple of weeks. I redesigned the school newspaper. I have descriptions for all of this. With my education, I have examples of my written work and my live streaming. That link clearly has died, and I'll have to update it. And that's the thing, whether it's in the case of LinkedIn or even if you have your own website, you need to make sure things like your links don't die. You need to make sure that everything looks good. And when things do change, you need to update them. But what you also have on LinkedIn is skills and endorsements, which is basically you put different skills that you have, and other people can choose to endorse them, choose to say that, yes, they in fact know how to do this, know how to do it well. You can write endorsements as well. I don't think I have anyone who's written one. But this is what I mean by LinkedIn serving as a profile. You can showcase all these different professional aspects of yourself. In the case of a musician, you may do it on LinkedIn. There are ways to make this work for music on LinkedIn. But you may not. And let's quick talk about that for 1 second. There are various niche sites, Facebook and Reddit as well. In some cases, our products fit better somewhere else. Musicians, there's a reason Bandcamp exists. There's a reason SoundCloud exists. That's a way to get your music out there. Never mind YouTube, but YouTube's more of a platform than it is a branding, marketing opportunity. For people who make crafts, and I mean like legitimate crafts, not just macaroni art. You've got Pinterest. That's a really good way to show what you do. If you want to sell it, go to Etsy. Facebook, in my opinion, is not... It's an okay way to market, but it's really played out, and it's very slow growth, from my experience. Facebook's better for discovering an audience than it is for promotion, unless you're a brand. Unless you're an established, business. That said, at the end of the day, it's better to have one, and just make sure that on your Facebook account is links to your more important social media. It's better to have that than have nothing at all. Reddit's a really good way to build an audience, but it's best not to upload all your stuff to Reddit. That's kind of crazy. It's better to have your own website, have your own Twitch account, have your own YouTube, and just post links in Reddit. Post a link and say, like, here's something awesome I did. I think it fits in with this subreddit. That'll get people going back to the more important platforms that you use. And never forget that any of these platforms could disappear, and that's why having a website or a blog is really useful. There's a company I follow called Rooster Teeth. They've been around for quite the while at this point. Anyone who ever watched Red vs. Blue, they made that. And their CEO, one of their owners, talks about the idea of the best thing they ever did was build their own website, roosterteeth.com, instead of just relying on YouTube, instead of just relying on any one platform. Because those things change. YouTube changes its rules every couple of months. A good example is, I hesitate to ask if any of you ever had MySpace, but have any of you ever heard of MySpace? That's a really good example of how something that seems so solid can just vanish. There could be a day that happens to Facebook. Maybe, maybe not. I'm not going to speculate on that. But it's worth having a backup. So, in summary, building a brand needs to be a very intentional process. You can't just say, yeah, I'll figure out my brand as things go on. You need to think about it. It's super important. Don't stress yourself out too much. There's a lot of flexibility in it, but have some idea. It takes a lot of work, and promoting it takes even more work. Promotion is easily the hardest part, in my opinion, about having a brand, about having a product, about being a business. It's easy to make for me in videography. It's fairly easy for me to make a video. It's fairly easy for me to film. It's really hard to convince the thousands of people out there that they might want to buy a video. That's a tough thing to sell. And sometimes more than others, especially now you need to know how to adjust to things being so different. And not just in video, but with any brand. Different content works better on different platforms. Twitter versus Instagram. Instagram versus a blog. Each of those has different benefits and detriments. I'm not going to be a photographer and say I'm opening up a Bandcamp page, because it'd make no sense. It wouldn't work at all. At the end of the day, you do have a brand. You do have a product. You just have to discover it. All of you have those ideas. All of you have those skills. All of you have the opportunity to build on your skills and to make it into something else. You just need to think about it and try to grow upon that. Finally, our Code of Ethics assignment, which I did assign last week to my Mohawk students, that is due next week on the 29th at 11:59 as per usual. All the information is on my Canvas, and you can also submit your assignment on my Canvas. Again, it's super straightforward. It's 3 questions. Try to flesh them out as much as you can. After all, this assignment's, I think, worth 20% of your mark. But yeah, so once this one's due next week, I'll be assigning you your LinkedIn assignment, which is your final assignment before we move into advanced social journalism, which should be fun. We're hopefully going to be building blogs. So there we go. Next class, we're going to talk about social media career options, how to find work in social media, and the LinkedIn assignment. And we'll go over more detail on how to build a LinkedIn profile. After all, you'll need to do that. And questions, you have my email. So let's switch over to Cam and talk for a bit. So I had a question come up about how you show your brand or blog and make it catchy on something like Twitch, make it catchy on a website. Ultimately, it depends on what your brand is. Different products, different brands have different ways to make themselves look good, right? In the case of my video, it's the more I can show my video in action, the less people have to press a plus or a play button, the better. Because once the video is moving, you can see that it's a really nice looking video. In the case of photography, it speaks for itself. In the case of being, let's say, a content creator, which is always it's always a tough one. Being a YouTuber, being an influencer, doing all that. At the end of the day, it's about making yourself look fun and interesting. Hopefully you are. Presumably you're a fun, interesting person who will do well as a creator. You just need to get yourself out there. It's all about showcasing that side of yourself. On YouTube, you have the option to make a like a intro video, the video that's like a commercial for your channel. In the case of, let's say, your website, you almost have total control over this. If I go to, bear with me, I don't know what my portfolio site looks like. So if I go to my portfolio site, which I'll pull up now, it's super plain. I have not put a lot of love into this site. We have my basic information as a homepage. If we go over to video, you have access to all my videos, or not all my videos, but a selection of the ones I want to show off. Super straight up. You just click on any of the pictures. My photos I'm writing, I showcased in like a little blog. So depending on what you click on, it could be an article. If it's called a gallery, let's see if they even come up. Yep. If it's a gallery, you can see the gallery of photos. And then the contact page, as per usual. I'm not going to say this is a flashy way to show off my work. I haven't updated my portfolio in time. But what it does do is gives me a home base for everything. At the end of the day, I can send someone there. It looks good enough to give them an idea of what I do. In the case of Twitch, for example, I'm currently playing with how to make Twitch interesting and how to sell what I'm doing. A really good way to do that is graphics, and that's something I'm currently working on designing, developing. There's something to be said in branding for the colors you choose, the fonts you choose. There are entire packages for each company that's out there that say, here at McDonald's we use this font, we use this shade of red, we use this shade of yellow, all the time. And in doing that, everything we go to, whether it's if I always use these blues that are on screen, which I don't love, if I always use these blues on here, on Facebook, on my website, on my YouTube account, you'll start to recognize this blue as me. At the end of the day, that's branding. If I always sign off with stay safe, stay informed, wash your hands, which I tend to do, then if you simply see those words written on a page, whether or not you see my face, you know that's me. That's branding. It's hard to say exactly what makes something catchy on any of these platforms, because they all treat things differently. But the more consistency you can have, the better. The more you can make your Twitch page fit the vibe of your YouTube page, fit the vibe of your website, the better. And so colors and graphics really help with that. A logo helps with that. But beyond that, it's about making things interesting, fun, making them fit the vibe you want to give. Come up with a couple of adjectives for yourself, for your vibe. Are you, in my case, educational would be one for mine. I want to make sure that everything I do is informative. There's not much I want to put out that's just, willy-nilly. I want you to learn from everything. At the same time, if you want to be a YouTuber and make your stuff fun and interesting and very poppy and bubbly and light, make sure that everything you put out looks like that. Don't come on video just looking all sad and bummed out and just like give a really bad performance and just do whatever. Like you need to fit what you want to show people, right? Does anyone else have any questions or any news you've come across while we've been in class? Because we have a little bit more time. And for that matter, any of the Mohawk students, if you have questions about the assignment, feel free to drop them in chat as well. Also, to respond to Redirection Pro, I do hope that answered your question. I hope I didn't ramble too much. It's not the easiest question to answer, but and everyone has a different take on it. That's pretty much mine. Also, thank you for hosting. Okay, we got e-learning egg. Super irrelevant, but the voice actor for the soldier in Team Fortress 2 died of COVID-19. That's unfortunate. I've noticed on CNN, I'm not sure what other platforms have been doing it, but CNN every day they talk about someone who has passed away. So far, it's been there have been quite a few jazz musicians in New Orleans, Florida, that have passed away from COVID. How do you even know that? I'm very curious where you found out that information, because that's a very specific one. Let's see if I can't dig up something. Yeah, PC Gamer, it's all over the place, but yeah, Rick May. What else do we know him from? He's also in see, this is way more important than Team Fortress. Star Fox 64, Freddy Fish 5, Sly, Honor Among Thieves, Age of Empires 2. He's also an actual proper actor. He's in Fiddler on the Roof, Death of a Salesman. Funny thing happened on the way to the forum. John Prine. John Prine. His wife, according to Global, his wife Fiona said last month that she had tested for positive for COVID-19. She since recovered, but her husband was hospitalized March 26th with coronavirus symptoms. He was put on a ventilator, remained in intensive care for several days. Passed away. So I think that's a not 100% confirmed. There's a lot of those out there, which is why tracking numbers for something like this is so difficult. Never mind the different sources out there that just don't have all the information, or God forbid, hide their numbers, are also a source of concern. Yes, I'm trying to think of anything else that came up in the news that's worth talking about. Well, might as well bring this one up. There was the mass shooting in Nova Scotia. I believe it was 23 people killed. That has led to a whole conversation on gun control rules and laws within Canada. In fact, Trudeau addressed that this morning in his daily address, of all things. It's a very interesting one. I don't exactly want to have a gun just before it may or may not come up in chat. I don't want to have a gun rights debate. That's not my jam right now. But it's interesting to see how they're trying to navigate something like this during the other crisis that's going on. There's quite a few different crimes that it just kind of occur because, well, no one's out. The arson's a really good example. The man set 2 fires, one on one side of the road and then one just down a block on the other side of the road. And there was no one to be around and see him before he set the second fire, right? Or, yeah. But with that, unless anything comes up in the next minute or so, I'm going to call that a pretty successful end to class. For those who are interested, I'll actually be on again today at 5 p.m. I'm just going to be on editing some photos I shot just over the last year. So I'll be editing the photos and just around to chat with anyone who wants to chat, or anyone who wants to know more about the editing process can ask questions on that. Normally I'd have an AV or an audio video editing class then, but that class has since wrapped up. So now I'm using it as an opportunity to just work on some digital art skills. And again, I'm not seeing anything pop up in chat, so I'm going to say that's that. I hope you guys have a good one. I'll see you next week, same time, same place. And with that, stay safe, stay informed, and wash your hands. Have a good one, guys.